And this is going to stay, I tell you, this is not going to go away. Even if the situation becomes normal. So now, I hope now you'll be able to see it. Is it now coming? Okay, great. So now, just slight recapitulation. Then today I will start with the topic as you can see on your screen. That is finite element formulation with multi-dielectric media in two-dimensional system. But before that, slightly I go back to this diagram, that how we developed these equations, that our target node is node 0, which is our convention even in the finite difference. And we can have hexagonal connectivity or we can have octagonal connectivity, and then we develop the equations in our last class, and I have also sent you the note. Now in this case, all the triangles and the equation developed, I think that is here. Yeah, here. Equation 15.16, you can see we have written epsilon r t. T stands for the triangle. So this is the value of the permittivity, relative permittivity of the medium within a particular triangle. That's how this equation is developed. And from this actually we go into the two-dimensional calculation. This gives us the clue. That means when I am going for multi-dielectric calculation or derivation, in FEM it is so simple that what we have to do is simply that within a triangle this epsilon r should not change. So if I now show you this diagram, it's a hexagonal connectivity and it's a two-dimensional system. Now this dotted line you can see in the middle is the boundary. On the right side it is epsilon r1, on the left side it is epsilon r2. So basically what we have to do is simply we have to arrange this triangle, that means the discretization in such a way that one side of the triangle will always be on the boundary. Then if you look T1, T2, etc., every triangle has just one particular epsilon r. And then what happens if you look at this, again going back to that basic equation 15.16, look at the other terms. It's just simply the coordinate of the nodes, nothing else. So therefore, when I write the equation for this two-dimensional system, what I am going to write is simply I take any triangle and write down the coefficients, and in that coefficient I will just choose the appropriate value of epsilon r. For example, here you can see that so here, at the bottom of your screen, look at that. See, if I take the node 2 and then if I refer equation 15.17, then I know that node 2 there is a coefficient f2, and f2 is summation of two coefficients. One is the k2, 2 stands for when the node 2 is the 2 of that derivation. That is, in our derivation we have used a terminology 1, 2, 3. That is the second node. And then in triangle 1, node 2 is the third node. So it is K3. And K2 and K3 again is as per equation 15.16 on your screen. So when I am writing this F2 at the bottom of your screen for, let's say, this node 2, then I have to take the K2, that is the coefficient for node 2 of the triangle of T2. What I am going to do is very simple, that K2 T2, the expression is as per the previous one, that 15.16, only you see I have changed it as epsilon r2. Why? Because triangle 2 is within epsilon r2. Then similarly, F2 has another term K3T1. But now in this T1, the permittivity is epsilon r 1. So what we do, we use the expression for K3, which is as per 15.16 above. Simply we write epsilon r 1. Rest of the thing is just the coordinates. And therefore, in this way, we can write it for this node 5 also. Here we will take node 5 is in belonging to T4 and T5, but when node 5 is belonging to T4, if you take the anticlockwise, then 0, 4, 5, so it is the third node. Then node 5 belonging to T5, then it is 0, 5, 6 anticlockwise, so it is the second node. So you took K3 for T4 and K2 for T5. Again, you see here, then K3 for T4, we have taken epsilon r2 because T4 is on the epsilon r2. Then K2 for T5, we have taken epsilon r1 because triangle 5 is on the epsilon r1. That's what it is. So you see the beauty of the whole derivation. If you compare it with the finite difference, in finite difference we have to develop a completely different equation. Whereas in this case, we don't need that. We just have to simply take the appropriate value of epsilon r and we use the same equation, that is 15.16 and 15.17. We don't make any changes in the equation. That's the whole beauty of the FEM, and that is the first thing that FEM actually replaced FDM, that people immediately understood that then FDM is not good enough. FEM is much more powerful. Now look at the next one, that is if I look into the FEM for axisymmetric system. Now if you remember, I have explained the axisymmetric system, that it is rotationally symmetric around the axis of symmetry, as you can see now in the diagram below at the bottom of your screen. Now, if you remember that I told that the total energy of any element is half epsilon 0 epsilon r E square, where E is the electric field intensity within the element. But this is half epsilon E square is the energy density, that means energy per unit volume. So we have to multiply it by the volume of the element. The area is well defined. We can calculate the area of the triangle from the coordinate itself. Then in two-dimensional system, we have taken the depth that is perpendicular to the screen as 1. So it was A into 1. Because in two-dimensional system, it is field is not varying in the translational direction. That means perpendicular to the xy plane. But in this case, it is not translational. It is rotationally symmetric. So we cannot multiply A with 1 here to get the volume, because you remember how I am getting the volume. I am rotating this triangle around the axis. Then I am getting the volume. So in this case, then what we are going to do is we are going to take the coordinate r1 plus r2 plus r3 by 3, which will be definitely in the within the triangle, and then we'll rotate this r1 plus r2 plus r3 by 3 around the axis, that means 2 pi r, as it is here, you see equation 15.20. Then this will become L, and if I multiplied A by L, then that will become the volume of the element. Now definitely you can argue that this may not be the correct way of getting the volume. I can calculate the volume to be precisely exact. Yes, that we can do. But this approximation holds quite good if this triangle is small in size. If the triangle is large, then this will give error. But if the triangle is small in size, then you will get the volume quite accurately. Now, if that is the case, then in the derivation side, if you compare the previous equation, that means 15.4b, again just slightly going back, where is here? Look at it in this 15.14b. Actually, we eliminated this L, which is there 15.14a, because this L was 1 in the translational direction, that is perpendicular to xy plane. But now this L is not 1. L is as we have given. And this L will vary from triangle to triangle. So we cannot eliminate L. So what we are going to do here now, you can see here now, we put in that equation, that is 15.14a, the entire value of L. And then whatever is constant like pi, etc., that we eliminate, and rest of the term we keep. So what will happen instead of 15.16, what you again slightly go back, 15.16 was our basic equation for two-dimensional system, and here this epsilon r by d, actually there was multiplied by 1 in this expression. Now that 1 has been changed here. If you look here, where is it? Here. Correct. Now you see 15.22. Instead of 1, we have writing capital R. What is capital R? Capital R is R1 plus R2 plus R3, because these are constant terms, 2 pi by 3. So we have replaced that. We have written capital R here at the on your screen, R1 plus R2 plus R3. So now if you look at it, once again you see that this equation is almost the same as the two-dimensional equations. Only change is that one additional term has come R, but that R is also related to the coordinates. So therefore, once I define the triangle and know the coordinates, which comes from the mesh generator, our problem is solved. That's really the beauty of the FEM. And uh, you can already see that in two-dimensional system, single dielectric, multi-dielectric doesn't matter. We use a single equation, 15.16. We make a small change in 15.16, just multiply by capital R, where R is R1 plus R2 plus R3. We get the equation for the axisymmetric system, which means that it's almost a same equation with a very delta amount of change. And then if you ask me what will be in the three-dimensional case, well, three-dimensional case, naturally it will not be a triangle. The discretization is held by a tetrahedron. And a tetrahedron, you know, there are 4 sides, and all the 4 sides are 4 triangles. Therefore, we can derive that. But that's I am not doing in your class. The derivation is again very simple. In fact, if you are interested, you do it yourself. Just take it a tetrahedron, follow the same methodology that I have done, only your determinants will no longer be here 3 by 3, it will be 4 by 4. So you can derive it. I mean, if anybody of you are interested in mathematics, do it. It's a great fun to derive it. Then you will see how powerful FEM is. That it's so straightforward and so simple, but yet so powerful. And another beauty of it is, I have not told you about that. See, look at these triangles. Actually, these sides of the triangles, I have shown it as straight lines. But it's not necessary that these triangles has to be straight line the sides. There is something called curvilinear triangles. This is called a linear triangle, what I am showing. But there is also something called a curvilinear triangles. What is a curvilinear triangle? Where these sides are not straight line, but it's a curve. Of course, this curve we can define by an equation. There are a lot of ways of defining such curves. And once I do that definition by a curve, can you just imagine how powerful this becomes? Why? Because then any shape of any object I can match by that curve, which is not possible by FEM. Therefore, this FEM methodology with curvilinear triangles is actually can simulate or can create a geometry of absolutely arbitrary shape. That's one of the great powerful feature of FEM. And then if I extend my logic, that curvilinear triangles where it is uh, the sides are curved. Why I'm saying linear? Because the triangle still follows that linear variation of potential within the triangle. So I'm using the term curvilinear triangles. But if the triangle size becomes small, then the sides which are curved, they are also becoming straight lines. So you can see this beauty of this derivation. That's why FEM is today, in fact, all pervasive. Wherever you will be using any sort of computation, I am sure no more than 80% cases, you will be using FEM. Now, just a small example I have given here so that you can understand how it is being written. So it's a two-dimensional configuration. So please remember that it's a translational case. That means the field is not varying in the translational direction perpendicular to the screen. So top is a plate because it is translational. So a straight line when translated in z direction gives rise to a plate. So it's a parallel plate configuration. You can clearly now understand. 1, 2, 3, 4 is the top plate. 9, 10, 11, 12 is the bottom plate. Top plate I am assuming 100. Bottom plate I am 0. By the way, in all field calculation, probably you will find that the values are taken as 100 and 0. There is a clear-cut logic behind that. It is 100 doesn't mean it's the absolute value. 100 stands for 100%. So if it is 33 kV, 100% is 33 kV. Then any other value, if it comes 60, then it is 60% of that 100%. That means potential at another point, if it is 60, that doesn't mean it is 60. It is 60% of 33 kV. So that's how we do the field calculation. So that it is irrespective of the potential. We always get the results in terms of the percentage values. And just to make the computation simpler, I have to have a boundary. So on the right side, the node 8 I have defined as 40 volts. On the right side, I have defined as 45 volts. Then distances are h, etc. So we have given. So now how can I write the equation? So it is very simple. I write the same equation, that is 15.17, which I have explained before. So now if we look at F1, node 6, here is the equation is for node 6. Where is node 6? Here, node 6. It's a hexagonal connectivity. So you can clearly see there are 6 triangles, and each 6 triangle, our target node is 6, which is actually the node 0. And here you see F056 at the bottom of your screen, F056. Because our node 0 is the 6th node here, that is 56. Then according to the triangles, you can mark the triangles T1, T2, etc. Then you choose the nodes. For example, here, this where my mouse is moving, this node, anti-clockwise directions, node 0 is 6, node 2 is 2, node 3 is 1. Here this my mouse is moving, then node 0 is 6, node 2 is 1, node 3 is 5. So in this way, all 6 triangles you can write. And the potentials are as per whatever configuration which is here given on your screen at the bottom. So you can write. So here it is the coefficients that you can write. And of course, what will be the coefficient? Coefficient, of course, will come in terms of the coordinates. So since it is given already h, 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 and if you consider an axis, you can get the values of coordinates, and then straight away you can write it. But I mean that is not so important. That is in fact a basic algebra which you can do. This is a multi-dielectric case. Where is the boundary? Boundary is at the middle. This is again the parallel plate configuration. Top plate 1, 2, 3, 4, bottom plate 9, 10, 11, 12, which is same as the previous example. Then at the boundary, I have 5, 6, 7, 8, where 5 is the boundary node on the left side, 8 is the boundary node on the right side, and these two potentials I have specified. Then above this boundary on the top, we have air, let's say epsilon r1 is 1. Below this boundary, I have epsilon r2 as 4. So this is the my configuration. So what I do is, once again, you can see here, I have written for the elements triangle 615. Where is the triangle 615? Here, my mouse is moving. 615, this is a triangle. Then triangle 6 to 1, triangle 6 to 1. Here also epsilon r is 1. Then triangle 7 to 6. Here 7 to 6. Then triangle 732. Here at the bottom 732. And triangle 783. Triangle 783. Please remember, our target is only node 6 and node 7. So we are interested in only those triangles to which the node 6 and node 7 belong. That's why the triangle 1059, now my mouse is moving, 1059, I'm not interested. Why? Because here neither the node 6 nor the node 7 belongs to this triangle. So I'm not interested in that in this particular problem. Similarly, triangle 843 here on the right top side, look at my mouse. Here also, this triangle does not have node 6 or node 7, so we are not interested for solving this problem. So, similarly, just we follow the same methodology given in problem 1. We follow the same methodology, but we choose the value of epsilon r1 and epsilon r2 according to the triangles. That means which triangle is on epsilon r4, which triangle is epsilon r1, which is very clear from the configuration. So you can clearly see that development of equations for FEM is really a powerful one. Having said that, one thing I have not discussed that I have to discuss, because that's a very important aspect. I am stopping this file and bringing in another file here. Let me show you that file. Here, I hope you will be able to see it now. Yes, coming. Therefore, what is the type of equation, or simply the system of equation that I am going to get here? Once again, I am going to refer that 15.3, that means that hexagonal connectivity, that figure, and equation 15.17, where 15.17 I have already shown on the screen. This is what we are discussing. Now, as you can clearly see from those two examples I have given, the same equation is applied to the different nodes. So if I have, instead of 2 nodes, in the 2 problems, we have 2 nodes where we have written the equation. But in an actual problem, it could be n number of unknown node potential, where n could be pretty high. In fact, I have personally worked where n was of the order of 1 lakh or more in a practical problem. So when I write that equation for n number of nodes, for one particular node, this 15.17 is written. But remember that when I have to solve n number of node potentials, then for every node I write that equation. So totally I get n number of equations. And in that n number of equations, if I arrange it now, I can show it now, and you can see it on your screen. Then instead of writing just F1, we are writing F11. Why a double subscript? That means 1 is representing the triangle number, the first one, and the second one is representing the node number. Now, if there are 1000 node potentials for which we are writing the equation, so we will have 1000 equations. And therefore, when I write this entire system of equation, every row, that's what I try to explain. Please listen carefully. Every row, actually there are 1000 variables, phi 1, phi 2, etc. up to phi n. Because you all know that if you have to solve 1000 variables, you need 1000 equations, and therefore the matrix has to be a square matrix, 1000 by 1000, that is n into n, otherwise you can't solve. So we have, therefore, in this row, if there are n number of variables, so there will be n number of columns. Each variable is one column. So we'll have n is 1000, we'll have 1000 columns. Each column we will have phi 1, phi 2 up to phi n, and each column will have a coefficient. But now this is important. When I look at 15.17, which is the specific equation for one particular node, I can find that only 7 node potentials are involved, because hexagonal connectivity is like that. One target node connected to 6 nodes. So total 7 node potentials are involved. So when I write the equation, only 7 coefficients I will get. Whereas when I put it in the matrix form, this row will have n number of columns. Let's say 1000. But out of that, only 7 have a coefficient which is non-zero. So what will happen? Depending on the connectivity, whichever nodes are connected, that will have a non-zero element. So that coefficient will be non-zero, but all other coefficients will be zero. Variables will be present, because variables we are going to solve. So if first one is not connected, it will be like 0 into phi 1. Second one, if it is connected, then it will be f1 to phi 2. Then in the middle, if it is not connected, then it will be 0 into phi j. Then in the end, if it is connected, then it will be f1n into phi j. That's one equation. What I'm trying to say is that if I look at one row of that matrix, there will be n number of columns. Just to make it understandable, let's say 1000 columns, 1000 nodes we are going to solve. But 7 nodes are connected. So there will be 7 coefficients which are non-zero. Rest 993 coefficients will be 0. So when I represent it in a matrix form, how do I write? We matrix, first one will be an F matrix. That F matrix will be F11, F12, etc. Second row, F21, F22, etc. So when I actually prepare the matrix, it will be like 0, 0, 0, then some value, then 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, then one value, then 0, 0, 0, 0, one value. So 7 values will be there, rest are 0. That's how the matrix looks like, actually. So if it is a 1000 by 1000 matrix, can you tell me how many are non-zero? When I am applying equation 15.17 to 1000 node potentials, so I will get a 1000 by 1000 matrix. What I am trying to explain just now, is it possible to tell you how many are non-zero elements of this matrix? There's no, yes, correct. So every row 7 only. There are 1000 nodes, 1000 rows. So 7 into 1000, 7000. Absolutely correct. And what is the total number of elements? It's 10 to the power 6, right? So can you see the matrix type or nature of the matrix? What? It's a square matrix, but a total 10 to the power 6 elements are there, out of which only 7 into 10 to the power 3 is non-zero. What is this matrix called? There is a very specific name for this matrix. I think you know, you are unable to recall it. Anybody can recall what is this matrix called? If I have 10 to the power 6 elements in a matrix, out of which only 7000 non-zero. What is this matrix called? It's called sparse matrix. Sparse. It's called sparse matrix, and sparse matrix is a very well-known matrix type in our mathematics, and particularly in computer methodology, that numerical computation. Did you go through any course on numerical techniques? First year, not in the third year or anywhere? No class? No? First year? Ha ha ha. Ha. Oh, that was in the first year. Common curriculum, but was it taught by electrical faculty or other? SD. Acha, Shobhan. Okay. Anyway, I think it is too far away from your final year. This is another problem of our semester system. You might have forgotten all that. Anyway, this sparse matrix is a very special type of matrix. So what I am trying to impress upon you is that FEM generates a sparse matrix, and FDM also generates a sparse matrix. I think I tried to tell you that. In the same way, FDM also, if you recall, the equation involves only, if it is a two-dimensional system, only 5 nodes, 1 target node and 4 connected nodes. So only 5 node potentials and 5 coefficients. But if it is a 1000 by 1000 node, then only 5000 will be non-zero, rest are 0 in FDM. In FEM, it is 7000 non-zero, rest are 0. So both FDM and FEM, they have one feature in common, that their matrix is a sparse matrix. And solution of a sparse matrix by numerical techniques, for that there are very specific techniques which if we use, we get very quick convergence, as well as we get a good accuracy in the result. By the way, can you tell me how we solve linear system of equation? Method, name. This you should be able to tell. I have a system of linear equation, n by n. How do I solve it? Can you name one technique? This you should be able to tell. I mean, why are you all silent? Have you gone to play badminton? It feels like that, no? Isn't it? That you just log in, then your video audio off, then you can safely play table tennis. Anyway, I mean, this is very strange that you are unable to tell one method. By the way, in your school level, you have very first way you learned how to solve elimination method, right? You remember that. But now this elimination method, this is elimination method is not the name. Actually, who actually first proposed this elimination method? A very famous scientist. Do you remember? Elimination is correct, but it is called by a name, like Newtonian elimination, somebody like that. Who proposed it? Gauss, yes. It is called Gaussian elimination. It was first proposed by the Gauss, and that's why it is still known as Gaussian elimination. And that's exactly what you can do in computers. But in that Gaussian elimination, when you do that elimination, if you have a 3 by 3 equation, after you do the Gaussian elimination, if you just look at the coefficient, have you noted a very typical feature that the last row, you only have the third variable, isn't it? X, Y, Z. After your elimination, third row only has Z. Second row will have Y and Z. First row will have X, Y, Z. If you now think about that matrix, it's a very interesting, isn't it? So if you take the diagonal of that matrix, upper side of the diagonal is actually non-zero, but then after elimination, the lower half of the diagonal is zero, isn't it? The coefficients. That's exactly what we do. This is actually the Gaussian elimination technique. That it is called that lower upper division. That lower half and upper half. Lower half becomes zero, the upper half becomes a non-zero, and then we get the result. But then the most critical one term of that Gaussian elimination are the diagonal. If any diagonal element is zero, can you get a solution? Now these are the critical points you have to understand. In Gaussian elimination, we can't get a result if the diagonal term is zero. Now look at this sparse matrix. There are so many zeros. So there will be a lot of diagonal terms will be zero. So if I have to apply Gaussian elimination, there will be a lot of what we call pivoting has to be done. Have you heard the term pivoting? Pivoting means you exchange the row. That means second row becomes 113th row, 113th row becomes second row. Why? Because then the second row coefficient becomes, on the diagonal term, becomes non-zero. So we have to make all the diagonal terms non-zero. This is the first step, without which Gaussian elimination fails. It cannot work. Second thing is this matrix conditioning. There is something called matrix conditioning. If you find out the eigenvalues and others, then you will see that if the diagonal values are low and non-diagonal values are high, even after pivoting, your solution will be very poor. Very poor. This is a typical problem with Gaussian elimination. So if you are forgetting all that, just go through it. This is called matrix condition. We have to check the matrix condition. So what we do is, we don't do Gaussian elimination for such sparse matrix. Very simple. We don't do it. Then what do we do? What is the alternative if we don't do Gaussian elimination? We go for iterative solution, because there are several iterative methods. I think you know the iterative methods. Can you name one iterative method? No, interpolation is not one. It is, but you have to be very careful about your pronunciation, right? Because if you are going to any other institute, or when you are sitting in a meeting of 15 people, you have to be very careful. So it is Gauss-Seidel. So go for Gauss-Seidel iteration. That is one of the simplest iteration. Then you have many others. Another one is Gauss-Jordan, etc., etc. There are so many. So very straightforward Gauss-Seidel you can do, and you will get a very good solution. So why I am telling all of this? Because you are Jadavpur University graduates. You have to know this. That's your strength compared to the others. That if somebody else can say X, you can always be able to say X plus delta X. You have some additional knowledge with you. And that's what makes our students different. I mean, and please remember that I am also a student of Jadavpur University. I am not from any other institute. And that's what I felt, that this is what our strength is. Okay, now 12 o'clock, I don't want to intrude into anybody else's class. I think today's my part is over. So you can log off and join Professor Mitada's class. And this note I am going to send you. And as we have discussed, our next class is when? 3rd, right? Our agreed next class is 3rd of September. Okay, please join on 3rd of September, and seminar class I am going to send separate email. Okay.